I was recently asked a question about building a dynamic world. And I think this is something that, as a writer, it's easy to get lost in. And so I want to talk a little bit about how I try to build dynamic worlds without getting just mired down in the detail. My name is Seth. I'm a full-time fantasy author with over 20 books published, and I make these videos because I remember just how confusing it was when I started writing, and I don't want you to be stuck in that same place. Somebody on my Discord was talking about how difficult it can be to build a dynamic world, and specifically how they sort of got stuck in the writing process because the world wasn't alive in their head. But when they went to make it alive in their head, when they went to create the world, all of a sudden they sort of got lost in the details and they lost the plot. They lost the thread of the story. Now, I think this is a really common thing, and it's something that I personally struggled with quite a bit when I started. In fact, I am not naturally a super focused person, and so often I just sort of meander through my stories. And anybody who's read them can probably tell you that that's true. This is one of the reasons that I like series. I can sort of meander my way through a couple different books, always tying back in, of course. And I have gotten better over time about making sure that my core remains the same. You might think of it as the spine of your story, or the core concept that you always come back to. So how do you incorporate world building into writing a novel in a way that makes the world feel dynamic, not stale, but doesn't turn into a swamp that sucks you down into the mud? Well, that's a really good question. And if I'm totally honest, I'm still figuring it out. But I can share the little bit that I know. I think it really comes down to one single ultra important thing. You have to give your readers and yourself space to wonder. Now, this is probably contrary to 99% of all of the world building advice you're going to get out there. I highly recommend that if you're interested in world building specifically, you check out the Worldcraft Club podcast. I am a little bit biased as I started that podcast with a friend of mine named James, but it's got some great conversations about world building, not just between us, but with other creators as well. And we've spent the last 4 years talking about all of this stuff and sort of having an evolving conversation on this topic. So again, if world building is your jam, definitely check that out. Like I said though, we have some sort of contrarian advice when it comes to world building, which is do less. I don't actually think that adding detail to your world is super helpful. Let me break down why that is, and then I want to talk a little bit about sort of the practical application of how I do it. Now, as with all advice, your mileage may vary, so definitely take this stuff and use what's helpful and then throw out the rest. I think it's really helpful to not share all of the details because it encourages participation for your reader. Why is that important? If you walk into a restaurant and you sit down at the table and the waiter walks up and says, "What can I get you?" And you say, "Well, is there a menu?" And they say, "No, but I can give you a list of all of the things we have." And then they rattle off every dish that the restaurant serves. By about the second item, you're going to glaze over, and none of what they're saying is going to make any significant impact on you. The details that they add to the dishes are probably just going to go in one ear and out the other. You might manage to grasp sort of what the general theme of the restaurant is. You may manage to grasp what the specific dishes are even. But all of the stuff that goes into it, you're probably not going to remember. And that's because your brain is being overloaded with information. This is why you're handed a menu and allowed to peruse it at your leisure, because your brain can absorb the information at your own speed and can make connections between what you're reading and what it is that you actually enjoy. Well, world building is sort of the same. If somebody comes to your book and opens it up and you just blast them right in the face with a ton of world building detail, they're going to glaze over because They simply cannot handle the density of the information. If, on the other hand, you are sparing in your details, they are going to start picking it up and their brain is going to start putting it together like a little puzzle. And that's where the magic happens. Because when somebody makes a connection for themselves, it's way more impactful than if you make the connection for them and simply tell them the information. The best mysteries are mysteries that we can solve before we are told the answer. And that doesn't just go for mystery novels. You can fill your worlds with those kinds of mysteries where the reader can make the connection before characters are even told about it. And I've found that when we write in that way, we end up creating a more dynamic world than when we simply prescribe the way everything is and present it to the reader. So let's talk a little bit about, on a practical level, how I actually do that in stories. I'm a very principle-based writer. That is, I don't have strict rules. I have principles that I like to follow. So the big principle that I follow is the one that I've already said. Give your readers and yourself room to wonder about your world. Don't try to answer every single question right out of the gate. Instead, allow yourself to come up with those answers to those questions as you write. When I do that, it helps me really immerse myself in the world and get into it, like sink myself into it, so that I'm not just writing the story, but I'm actually participating in the story. Another thing that I like to do is I like to point to something interesting, but not actually expose it. This is sort of like the backdrop for a movie. Sometimes you'll see a scene and there will be something going on in the background and you don't know what exactly is happening, but you can see it. I mean, the most mundane example of this is like the hero is standing in the street and somebody walks behind them talking on their cell phone. Like, that's a person with a life, right? They're having a conversation on the phone with somebody. It could be about business. It could be about their family. Somebody they know could have just gotten hit by a bus or abducted by aliens. We don't know. But we see that little thing happen and our brain starts to fill in whatever our sort of natural instinct is about what's going on based on the clues we see. Well, in writing, we don't have that visual medium of showing something like that. It's commonly said that everything we write should have a reason for existing. Well, sometimes I add details to my book simply so that there is mystery there. There is some intrigue. There is some depth. So that I can imagine what is going on in that scene, sort of like it was a movie. And by doing that, by adding those little details in, I end up creating mystery and wonder that leads to a dynamic feeling in the world. You can do the same thing by creating trails without pointing to their destination. So anyway, I hope that's helpful to you. I hope that you can use some of that in your own writing. Like I said, definitely check out the Worldcraft Club podcast. We've also got a Discord there. If you're not on Discord, I do have a Discord channel. I'll drop the link in the description. You're all welcome to join. We would love to have you.